Westinghouse Broadcasting Company brings you The Sound of War, the actual sound record of World War II. 2,191 days from the time Hitler's Panzer divisions moved across the Polish borders to the ceremony of the Japanese surrender aboard the United States battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay. World War II, the most terrible period of death and destruction in the long history of man. World War II, a drama preserved for all time through the medium of radio, an era never to be forgotten.
400,000 men are safely back in this country. Others are still fighting with the French. We have also brought back a great mass of stores, rifles, and munitions of all kinds, which had been accumulated in France during the last 9 months. We have therefore in this island today a very large and powerful military force. This force includes all our best trained troops and our finest troops, including scores of thousands of those who have already measured their quality against the Germans and found themselves at no disadvantage. By airborne soldiers. We ought to be able to give these gentry a warm reception, both in the air and also, if they reach the ground in any condition, to continue the discussion. But the great question is, can we break Hitler's air weapon? Now, of course, it is a very great pity that we have not got an air force at least equal to that of the most powerful enemy within reach of our shores. We were promised that 5 years ago. But we have a very powerful air force which has proved itself far superior in quality, both in men and in many types of machines, to anything we have met so far in the numerous and fierce air battles which have been fought with the Germans. I look forward confidently to the exploits of our fighter pilots, these splendid men, this brilliant youth, who will have the glory of saving their native land, their island home, and all they love from the most deadly of all attacks.
On June 22nd, 1940, the French nation surrendered to the Germans at the French town of Compiègne. 2 weeks later, the British Navy attacked the remnants of the French Navy at Oran. The Prime Minister tells of the action.
During the last fortnight, the British Navy, in addition to blockading what is left of the German fleet and chasing the Italian fleet, has had imposed upon it the sad duty of putting effectually out of action for the duration of the war the capital ships of the French Navy. These, under the armistice terms signed in the railway coach at Compiègne, would have been placed within the power of Nazi Germany. The transference of these ships to Hitler would have endangered the security both of Great Britain and the United States. We therefore had no choice but to act as we did, and to act forthwith. Our painful task is now completed. Although the unfinished battleship, the Jean Bart, still rests in a Moroccan harbor, and there are a number of French warships at Toulon and in various French ports all over the world, these are not in a condition or of a character to derange our preponderance of naval power. Today is the 14th of July, the National Festival of France. A year ago in Paris, I watched the stately parade down the Champs-Élysées of the French army and the French Empire. Who could foresee what the course of a year would bring? Who can foresee what the course of other years will bring? Faith is given to us as a help and comfort when we stand in awe before the unfurling scroll of human destiny. And I proclaim my faith that some of us will live to see a 14th of July, when a liberated France will once again rejoice in her greatness and in her glory, and once again stand forward as the champion of the freedom and the rights of man. When that day dawns, and dawn it will, the soul of France will turn with comprehension and with kindness to those Frenchmen and French women, wherever they may be, who in the darkest hour did not despair of the Republic. In the meantime, we shall not waste our breath or cumber our thought with reproaches. When you have a friend and comrade at whose side you have faced tremendous struggles, and your friend is smitten down by a stunning blow, it may be necessary to make sure that the weapon that has fallen from his hands shall not be added to the resources of your common enemy. But you need not bear malice because of your friend's cries of delirium and gestures of agony. You must not add to his pain. You must work for his recovery. The association of interest between Britain and France remains. The cause remains. Duty inescapable remains.
Now it is July 10th, 1940. History will recall it as the Battle of Britain. On July 19th, Adolf Hitler spoke to the members of the Reichstag. Said Chancellor Hitler, "In this hour, I feel it to be my duty before my own conscience to appeal once more to reason and common sense in Great Britain as much as elsewhere. I consider myself in a position to make this appeal, since I am not a vanquished begging for favors, but the victor speaking in the name of reason. I can see no reason why this war need go on." So said Adolf Hitler. You will now hear a montage of words spoken in answer to Hitler's proposal by the Prime Minister of Great Britain.
And now it has come to us to stand alone in the breach and face the worst that the tyrant's might and enmity can do. Should the invader come to Britain, there will be no placid lying down of the people in submission before him, as we have seen, alas, in other countries. We shall defend every village, every town, and every city. The vast mass of London itself, fought street by street, could easily devour an entire hostile army. And we would rather see London laid in ruins and ashes than that it should be tamely and abjectly enslaved. The Battle of Britain is about to begin. Hitler knows that he will have to break us in this island or lose the war. Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duty, and so bear ourselves that if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will still say, this was their finest hour.
Destroy Great Britain. And all the time, masters of the sea and air, the British Empire, nay, in a certain sense, the whole English-speaking world, will be on its track, bearing with them the swords of justice.
Hitler knows that he will have to break us in this island or lose the war. If we can stand up to him, all Europe may be freed, and the life of the world may move forward into broad, sunlit uplands. But if we fail, then the whole world, including the United States, including all that we have known and cared for, will sink into the abyss of a new dark age, made more sinister and perhaps more protracted by the lights of perverted science. And if the Nazi villains drop down upon us from the skies, any night, in raid or heavy attack upon the key production centers, you will make it clear to them that they have not alighted in the poultry run, or in the rabbit farm, or even in the sheepfold, but that they have come down in the lion's den of the zoo. In July, August, and September, 40 or 50 squadrons, never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. Do not despair, brave Norwegians. Your land shall be cleansed, not only from the invader, but from the filthy quisligs who are in Toul. Lift up your heads, gallant Frenchmen. Not all the infamies of Darlan and of Laval shall stand between you and the restoration of your birthright. Tormented, mishandled, shamefully cast away peoples of Yugoslavia, glorious Greece, now subjected to the crowning insult of the rule of the Italian jackanapes. Be sure of yourselves, Czechs. Your independence shall be restored. Poles, the heroism of your people standing up to cruel oppressors, the courage of your soldiers, sailors, and airmen shall not be forgotten. Your country shall live again and resume its rightful part in the new organization of Europe. Tough, stout-hearted Dutch, Belgians, Luxembourgers, yield not an inch. Keep your souls clean from all contact with the Nazi. Make them feel, even in their fleeting hour of brutish triumph, that they are the moral outcasts of mankind. Help is coming. Mighty forces are arming in your behalf. Have faith, have hope. Deliverance is sure. Attraction was it that drew the manhood of Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, thousands of miles across the ocean to fight and suffer for 4 years in Flanders, or at the Dardanelles, or in the Balkans, or Palestine, in a quarrel about which, to tell the truth, they had not been formally consulted. What was it? What was the attraction? You could not write it down on paper. You could not print it in a book. You will not find it in any act of Parliament. Search the statute books as you may, it is not there. Some ancestral voice echoing down the ages suddenly called, "Come!" So they all came.
It is now September 7th, 1940. The summer has changed to the orange of autumn. New names have entered the conversation of almost every citizen of London. Names that will be on their lips as they look to the skies. Names like Heinkel and Stuka, the bombers of terror. Names like Messerschmitt and Focke-Wulf, the pursuit ships that protected them on their deadly mission. And there were proud names, names like Hurricane and Spitfire, the planes that took to the skies to meet them. And now one of the great dramatic broadcasts of the war. You will hear an eyewitness radio description of an actual dogfight high in the skies over Britain, as heard in August 1940 in London.
Well, now the Germans are dive-bombing a convoy out into sea. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 German dive bombers, Junkers 87s. There's one going down on his target now. Bomb. No, missed the ships. He hasn't hit a single ship. There are about 10 ships in the convoy, but he hasn't hit a single one. And there you can hear anti-aircraft going at them now. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are about 10 German machines dive-bombing a British convoy, which is just out to sea in the channel. I can't see anything. No, we thought he got a German one had been got then, but now the British fighters are coming up. Yes, here they come. They come in absolute steep dive, and you can see their bombs actually leave the machines and come into the water. You can hear our own guns going like anything now. I'm looking round now. I can hear machine gun fire, but I can't see our Spitfires. There must be somewhere there. Oh, here's one coming down now. There's one coming down in flames. Somebody's hit a German, and he's coming down. There's a long streak. He's coming down completely out of control, a long streak of smoke. The man's bailed out by parachute. The pilot's bailed out by parachute. He's a Junkers 87, and he's going slap into the sea, and there he goes. Smash! Terrific crumble of water, and there was a Junkers 87. There was only one man got out by parachute, so presumably there was only a crew of one in it. Here comes, there's one Spitfire. There's a little burst. There's another bomb dropping. Yes, it dropped. Oh, they missed the convoy. No, they haven't hit the convoy in all this. The sky is absolutely patterned now with bursts of anti-aircraft fire, and the sea is covered with smoke where the bombs have burst. But as far as I can see, there's not one single ship hit. And there is definitely one German machine down. And looking across the sea now, I can see the little white dot of parachute as the German pilot is floating down towards the spot where his machine crashed with such a big fountain of water about 2 minutes ago. Now then, there's a terrific mix-up now over the channel. It's impossible to tell which are our machines and which are the Germans. There's one definitely down in this battle, and there's a fight going on. There's a fight going on. You can hear the little rattles of machine gun bullets. That was a bomb, as you may imagine. Well, now, everything is peaceful again for the moment. The Germans, who came over in about 20 dive bombers, delivered their attack on the convoy, and I think they've made off as quickly as they came. Yes, I can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 Germans herring back towards France now for all they can go, and here are our Spitfires coming after them. There's going to be a big fight, I think, out there, but it will be too far away for us to see. Of course, there are lots more German machines up there. Can you see? Can you see, Phil? Yes, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 on top layer. 1, 2, 3. There are 2 layers of German machines. They were all, I think, I couldn't swear to it, but they were all, I think, Junkers 87s. Where are 2 more parachuters?
Flying sideways.
No, I think they're seagulls. Yes. You can hear the anti-aircraft batteries still going. Well, that was a really hot little engagement while it lasted. No damage done except to the Germans, who lost one machine, and the German pilot is still on the end of his parachute. They're appreciably nearer the sea than he was. I can see no boat going out to pick him up. So he'll probably have a long swim ashore. But that was a very unsuccessful attack on the convoy, I must say.
And so London stood, and Great Britain, and the people stood. And the skies were slowly clearing of the enemy. And soon the skies would be filled with the planes that would not send the citizens rushing to the bomb shelters, and children could scan the clouds with the safety of times before. And the man who spoke the words of courage would smile the good smile and those who heard him in the house would thank God that he was there. And in the hall that through the centuries heard the great voices of Pitt, Disraeli and Gladstone, and Lloyd George, there would once again resound the tribute of love and devotion, the only reward those who are led can give their leader, the greatest honor that man gives to fellow man. Westinghouse Broadcasting Company has brought you The Battle of Britain, the voices and sounds of the most dramatic and tragic period of our time. This program was written, produced, and directed by Bud Greenspan. My name is David Perry.
Westinghouse Broadcasting Company brings you The Sound of War, the actual sound record of World War II. 2,191 days from the time Hitler's Panzer divisions moved across the Polish borders to the ceremony of the Japanese surrender aboard the United States battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay. World War II, the most terrible period of death and destruction in the long history of man. World War II, a drama preserved for all time through the medium of radio, an era never to be forgotten. Tonight, the fall of France. It is the morning of May 7th, 1940. In the House of Commons in London, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain is making his opening remarks in a debate that will decide the fate of his government. 1 month earlier, British troops were outgeneraled and outmaneuvered when Germany made a surprise and successful invasion of Scandinavia. The Nazis invaded Denmark and Norway. A token expeditionary force was sent by Britain to Norway. They were defeated. Back in the home island, the Chamberlain government was set upon by friend and foe alike for their conduct of the war. In his speech, Chamberlain tries to explain the failure of the Norwegian campaign. To his aid comes the First Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill. Says Churchill, "I take complete responsibility for everything that has been done by the Admiralty, and I take my share of the burden." When he finishes, the floor is taken by David Lloyd George, Great Britain's World War I leader and longtime enemy of Chamberlain. Said Lloyd George, "I do not think the First Lord was entirely responsible for all the things that happened in Norway." Then he faced Chamberlain and said, "You ask for the nation to perform sacrifice. I say solemnly that the Prime Minister would give an example of sacrifice by giving up his seals of office. A brief recapitulation of the events leading up to the debate. Just 5 days before the German attack on Norway and Denmark, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain made a widely publicized address. On April 5th, Chamberlain said, "After 7 months of war, I feel 10 times as confident as I did in the beginning. I feel that our position is now stronger against the enemy than it was in the beginning." Then came the statement that in 35 days would ring derisively through the House of Commons as his government began to fall. Said Chamberlain on April 5th, "When war broke out, it was natural, since German preparations were far ahead of our own, that the enemy would take advantage of his initial superiority and attempt to overwhelm us and France before we had time to make good our deficiencies. Is it not a very extraordinary thing that no such attempt was made? Whatever the reason, one thing is certain. Hitler has missed the bus." Now came the 4-day debate that saw the Chamberlain government tottering. Finally, on May 10th, 1940, Germany again was on the move. In one fantastic sweep, they invaded Belgium, Luxembourg, and Holland, and simultaneously smashed across the French borders. In Great Britain, Winston Churchill was asked to form a government.
I speak to you for the first time as Prime Minister in a solemn hour for the life of our country, of our empire, of our allies, and above all, of the cause of freedom. A tremendous battle is raging in France and Flanders. The Germans, by a remarkable combination of air bombing and heavily armored tanks, have broken through the French defenses north of the Maginot Line, and strong columns of their armored vehicles are ravaging the open country, which for the first day or two was without defenders. They have penetrated deeply and spread alarm and confusion in their track. Behind them, there are now appearing infantry in lorries, and behind them again, the large masses are moving forward. The regroupment of the French armies to make head again, and also to strike at this intruding wedge, has been proceeding for several days, largely assisted by the magnificent efforts of the Royal Air Force. We must not allow ourselves to be intimidated by the presence of these armored vehicles in unexpected places behind our lines. If they are behind our front, the French are also at many points fighting actively behind theirs. Both sides are therefore in an extremely dangerous position. And if the French army and our own army are well handled, as I believe they will be, if the French retain that genius for recovery and counterattack for which they have so long been famous, and if the British Army shows the dogged endurance and solid fighting power of which there have been so many examples in the past, then a sudden transformation of the scene might spring into being. Having received His Majesty's commission, I have formed an administration of men and women of every party and of almost every point.
Now, in a little more than 9 months, the Chamberlain government had fallen. And the man of peace would see his dream shattered. And history would remember his declaration of war speech of September 3rd, 1939, when World War II officially began.
I am speaking to you in the cabinet room at 10 Downing Street. This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany. You can imagine what a bitter blow it is to me that all my long struggle to win peace has failed. Yet I cannot believe that there is anything more or anything different that I could have done and that would have been more successful. Up to the very last, it would have been quite possible to have arranged a peaceful and honorable settlement between Germany and Poland. But Hitler would not have it. He had evidently made up his mind to attack Poland whatever happened. And although he now says he put forward reasonable proposals which were rejected by the Poles, that is not a true statement. The proposals were never shown to the Poles, made on behalf of the government. Give these your close attention. Now, may God bless you all, and may he defend the right. For it is evil things that we shall be fighting against. Brute force, bad faith, injustice, oppression, and persecution. And against them I am certain that the right will prevail.
The Nazi attack across France was unstoppable. 1 month to the day of the assault, momentous news crackled across the transatlantic wires. News that buckled France in the midst of her most terrible misery.
Mussolini began. Combatants on land, sea, and in the air. Black shirts of the Revolution and of the Legion. Men and women of Italy, of the Empire, and of the Kingdom of Albania. Listen, a declaration of war has been given to the ambassadors. To the ambassadors of France and England.
In the United States, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt spoke of the Italian attack.
On this 10th day of June, 1940, the hand that held the dagger has struck it into the back of its neighbor.
One man who, against the crown and royal family of Italy, against the Pope and all the authority of the Vatican, and of the Roman Catholic Church against the wishes of the Italian people who had no lust for this war. One man has erased the trustees and inheritors of ancient Rome upon the side of the ferocious pagan barbarians. There lies the tragedy of Italian history. And there stands the criminal who has wrought the deed of folly and of shame.
Also from Great Britain came a name that will live for all time. Charles de Gaulle.
Moi, Général de Gaulle, j'entreprends ici, en Angleterre, cette tâche nationale. J'invite tous les militaires français des armées de terre, de mer et de l'air. J'invite les ingénieurs et les ouvriers.
General de Gaulle is saying, I, General de Gaulle, undertake this national task here in England. I invite all French fighting men in the Army, Navy, and Air Force. I invite French engineers and French munition workers who may be in British territory or who can contrive to get there to join me. I invite the leaders, the soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the French forces on land, sea, and air, wherever they may be at this moment, to get in touch with me. I call upon all Frenchmen who wish to remain free to listen to me and to follow me. Long live France, in freedom, in honor, in independence.
It is June 21st, 1940, the town of Compiègne, France. The situation, the signing of the peace between Germany and France. The place, a town 45 miles north of Paris, the town of Compiègne. Compiègne, the final humiliation of France. Compiègne, where on November 11th, 1918, Marshal Ferdinand Foch had directed the surrender terms to the Germans at the end of World War I. The scene was an almost unbelievable one. Compiègne would now become the surrender place of the French. From the relics of World War I, the Germans had gathered the same railway car used in 1918 for their surrender. It would be used in the surrender ceremony today. The French had built a museum near the surrender site. One monument to the days of 1918 read, "To the heroic soldiers of France, defenders of our country and of right, glorious liberators of Alsace-Lorraine." Another inscription of a monument read, "Here on the 11th of November, 1918, succumbed the criminal pride of the German Empire, vanquished by the free peoples which it tried to enslave." The proceedings took 27 minutes. An eyewitness to the ceremony.
Hello, CBS. Hello, NBC. This is William C. Kirker now carrying on. Hitler himself was the first one to rise, and as soon as Adolf Hitler stood up to greet the French delegates by giving the Nazi salute, Herr von Ribbentrop and Rudolf Hess followed suit, while Field Marshal Goering and Grand Admiral von Raeder raised their batons, leaving General von Brauchitsch and von Keitel as the only ones to give the military salute. The French gentlemen themselves, in turn, greeted with the military salute, and all those present wore uniforms, except Monsieur Noël, who was attired in smart civilian clothes. He himself was quite a contrast to the glittering uniforms which surrounded him. However, undeterredly, he took his place almost facing Herr Hitler, who was sitting at the opposite side of that long green table with his back towards the statue of General Foch. Well, it was 21 years and 8 months ago that Compiègne was the scene of the signing of an armistice. And today, we are right here on the very same spot. It is the same car which was used that time, the same table, the same chairs. Only this time, everything is reversed. Where Marshal Foch sat that time, now Hitler sat. Where the German delegates had their place, now the French plenipotentiaries are seated. Everything is reversed. Then it was Germany who was asking for an armistice, and now it is France.
24 hours, the French signed the Instrument of Surrender. The terms: the demobilization of the French fleet, the turning over of all anti-Nazi Germans residing in France, the condition that any Frenchman caught while fighting with another country against Germany would be shot, and finally, the most tragic term of all, that French prisoners would not be released until the conclusion of peace. It is 4 years later. Since France's humiliating defeat, much has happened to bring about their liberation. Now Paris is again liberated.
This is John McBain in Paris. Those bells you can hear are the bells of Notre Dame Cathedral. They've just begun ringing about 2 or 3 minutes ago, and they're ringing a chime of thanksgiving that French troops have entered the city. We just came in this morning with the first correspondence, the first American car to come in with these French troops, and we've just had a big street fight here right in the square in front of the cathedral. And now all the church bells in the city are beginning. I can hear 3 or 4 more churches, and I'll let you hear them. We've just had a big fight here in the square in front of Notre Dame, and we're all lying on our stomachs and hoping for the best, but we hope that's all over now, and that these bells that we hear are a sign that the last German resistance in Paris is cleaned up. Boys are ready for battle because most of them have been 4 years away from Paris, and you can touch how they're feeling when they come back and see their own folk again. The French boys are dressed in American uniform. They look like Americans, but when they open their mouths, the people know they're French. These bells are pealing out a chime of thanksgiving that after all these years, Paris is again free. When people found we were the first American car to come into the city, they overwhelmed us with kindness. They gave us wine, flowers, food, even gave us cigarettes. They're French cigarettes. They cost them about $3 or $4 a packet. You can hear the crowd laugh here. Vous êtes content que nous sommes venus? You see for yourself how happy everyone is that we're here. He says we're very happy that the Allies are here. All right. All right. He says all right. Everything is fine. Now I see a very pretty nurse here. Vous êtes content aussi? Oh oui, très content. Bonjour. She's very happy to know. And he says we hope that the Germans will be pushed farther back.
So France has again returned to the family of nations. Westinghouse Broadcasting Company has brought you The Fall of France, the actual voices and sounds of some of the most dramatic moments of World War II. This program was written, produced, and directed by Bud Greenspan. My name is David Perry. the Westinghouse Broadcasting Company brings you The Sound of War, the actual sound record of World War II. 2,191 days from the time Hitler's Panzer divisions moved across the Polish borders to the ceremony of the Japanese surrender aboard the United States battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay. World War II, the most terrible period of death and destruction in the long history of man. World War II, a drama preserved for all time through the medium of radio, an era never to be forgotten.
Tonight, the Philippine Islands, their death, their life.
It's a long one down to around the 3-yard line. Ward Cup takes it. He's cutting up to his left. He's over the 10. Nice block there by Lehman. Cup still going. He's up to the 25. And now he's hit and hit hard about the 27-yard line. Bruiser Kennard made the tackle.
We interrupt this broadcast to bring you this important bulletin from the United Press. Flash, Washington. The White House announces Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor.
At 2:26 p.m. Sunday afternoon, December 7th, 1941, listeners to the New York Giant Brooklyn Dodger professional football game heard that announcement as the regular play-by-play of the broadcast was interrupted. 24 minutes later, just before the New York Philharmonic Orchestra was to go on with its 3 p.m. Sunday concert, a nationwide audience heard the news. One of those who heard the report by radio was Admiral Chester Nimitz. In her regular Sunday evening broadcast to the nation, Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt revised her prepared Sunday program to tell the following news.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm speaking to you tonight at a very serious moment in our history. The Cabinet is convening and the leaders in Congress are meeting with the President. The State Department and Army and Navy officials have been with the President all afternoon. In fact, the Japanese ambassador was talking to the President at the very time that Japan's airships were bombing our citizens in Hawaii and the Philippines and sinking one of our transports loaded with lumber on its way to Hawaii. By tomorrow morning, the members of Congress will have a full report and be ready for action. In the meantime, we, the people, are already prepared for action. For months now, the knowledge that something of this kind might happen has been hanging over our heads. And yet, it seemed impossible to believe, impossible to drop the everyday things of life and feel that there was only one thing which was important, preparation to meet an enemy, no matter where he struck. That is all over now, and there is no more uncertainty. We know what we have to face, and we know that we are ready to face it. I should like to say just a word to the women in the country tonight. I have a boy at sea on a destroyer. For all I know, he may be on his way to the Pacific. 2 of my children are in coast cities on the Pacific. Many of you all over this country have boys in the services who will now be called upon to go into action. You have friends and families in what has suddenly become a danger zone. You cannot escape anxiety. You cannot escape a clutch of fear at your heart. And yet I hope that the certainty of what we have to meet will make you rise above these fears. We are the free and unconquerable people of the United States of America.
As the reports came in from Pearl Harbor, Americans who were generally unaware of just where Pearl Harbor was, or even why the Japanese were not already blasted from the water and air, received the news with shock and indignation. But soon there was the realization that a crippling blow had been struck the United States. When the final tally of destruction at Pearl Harbor was added up, the contrast between American and Japanese losses was appalling. The United States had 18 fighting ships sunk or damaged, 188 planes destroyed, 159 damaged, 2,403 Americans were killed. The loss for the Japanese, 29 planes, 5 midget submarines, 55 airmen were killed, and 9 members of the midget fleet never returned to the surface. Ironically, in the greatest defeat ever suffered by the United States, 1 Japanese sailor was captured. On Monday, December 8th, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt spoke to a joint session of Congress.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. I ask that the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire. With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God.
The following evening, President Roosevelt spoke to the nation by radio. Said the president, "We are now in the midst of a war not for conquest, not for vengeance, but for a world in which this nation and all this nation represents will be safe for our children. We expect to eliminate the danger from Japan, but it would serve us ill if we accomplished this and found the rest of the world was dominated by Hitler and Mussolini. We are going to win this war, and we are going to win the peace that follows. And in the difficult hours of this day, through dark days that may be yet to come, we will know that the vast majority of the members of the human race are on our side. Many of them are fighting with us. All of them are praying for us. For in representing our cause, we represent theirs as well. Our hope and their hope of liberty under God." Two days later in the Reichstag, Chancellor Adolf Hitler proclaimed to a cheering House of Ministers, "A historical revision of unique scope has been entrusted us by the Creator." Germany and Italy immediately declared war on the United States. In reply, Congress declared that a state of war had been thrust upon the United States. War was immediately declared on the whole of the Axis alliance. The battle had been joined. Immediate hostility was felt for anything and everything that was Japanese. But the United States had a large and loyal Japanese-American population. Many of these citizens resided in California. Governor Olson of California spoke by radio.
Well, my plans are to ask all of the people of California to behave with dignity and forbearance toward all Japanese persons in our state. Our distrust of the Japanese government does not warrant our taking out our hatred and distrust upon those about us. We have in California a large population of Japanese and Koreans. The great majority of these people are native-born American citizens, loyal to the government of the United States. Even the older non-citizen Japanese and Koreans in California are, for the most part, completely loyal, although they are not eligible for American citizenship. These loyal people, citizens and non-citizens alike, are anxious to render every possible assistance to our government in the prosecution of the war against Japan. They have so expressed themselves in great numbers and in no uncertain terms.
Soon it was realized that the attack on Pearl Harbor was not the only place that the Japanese had struck. In its far-flung, magnificently timed and coordinated attack, the Japanese hit British Malaya, Thailand, Hong Kong, Guam, Wake Island, and the Philippine Islands. On December 10th, the first United States territory was captured, the island of Guam. Less than 2 weeks later, the last message was tapped out by a wireless operator on Wake Island. The message read, "Urgent. Enemy on island. The issue is in doubt." Soon this report was heard over American radio.
The Navy announces that Wake Island is probably captured by the enemy. And now it is disclosed that fewer than 400 Marines held Wake Island for at least 14 days against heavy Japanese attacks. The Marines had 12 fighter planes and a small quantity of weapons. They were commanded by a 38-year-old Marine Major, James P.S. Devereux. They sank 1 Japanese light cruiser and 3 destroyers. They held out against 13 raids.
Meanwhile, the Japanese had been active against the British. Almost immediately after the attack on Pearl, Prime Minister Winston Churchill told a cheering House of Commons that Great Britain would immediately join the fight against the Japanese. The show of loyalty brought immediate disaster to the British Navy, a follow-up to the American tragedy at Pearl Harbor. On Monday, December 8th, almost at the moment President Roosevelt was making his declaration of war speech to the United States Congress, Japanese planes were swooping out of the skies off the Malayan coast to sink 2 of Great Britain's mightiest battle wagons, the Prince of Wales and the Repulse. In the House of Commons, Winston Churchill said, "In my whole experience, I do not remember any naval blow so heavy or so painful as the sinking of the Prince of Wales and Repulse. Fortunately, neither ship blew up. Therefore, 2,000 of the 3,000 officers and men aboard were saved. The heroism by the British crews was of almost unbelievable magnitude," said one American correspondent who observed the sinkings and behavior of the British seamen. "Believe me, I shall never take my hat off for anything less than a British seaman." Later, as Christmas 1941 neared, Prime Minister Churchill came to the United States for a war council with President Roosevelt. He was invited to speak to Congress.
They have certainly embarked upon a very considerable undertaking. After the outrages they have committed upon us at Pearl Harbor, in the Pacific Islands, in the Philippines, in Malaya and the Dutch East Indies, they must now know that the stakes for which they have decided to play are mortal.
There was much defeat before victory. The day after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Japanese began their air attack against the Philippine Islands. The Philippine Islands, composed of 7,083 islands and islets, the gateway for Japan's trade routes to the rich oil deposits of the Dutch East Indies. The Philippine Islands, annexed to the United States after the Spanish-American War of 1898. The Philippine Islands, by treaty with the United States, to be given their independence in the year 1944. The Philippine Islands, to become one of the most tragic defeats in United States history. The Philippine Islands, to become one of the great American victories of the war. Within 3 weeks after Pearl Harbor, the the Japanese invasion forces completed a massive landing on the north and south shores of the island of Luzon, the largest island of the Philippine group. Under the command of General Douglas MacArthur, Philippine and American troops courageously met the invaders, but they could not meet the massive frontal attack. MacArthur commanded but 60,000 native troops, 11,000 Filipino scouts, and 19,000 American fighting men. The MacArthur forces retreated to the Bataan Peninsula, which juts out into Manila Bay. On January 2nd, the Japanese, wildly shouting choruses of banzai, entered the capital city of Manila. From Bataan, the American and Filipino forces would continue the fight. The American and Filipino troops were in terrible agony. Exhausted, half-starved, they slogged back to Bataan. The Japanese were merciless and relentless. The defenders were under 24-hour attack. Finally, General Masahiro Homma, commander-in-chief of the Japanese forces, wrote to General MacArthur. Said the letter, "Your prestige and honor have been upheld. However, in order to avoid needless bloodshed and save your troops from further destruction, it is advised that you surrender." The troops responded with increased fervor. They would not surrender. Now disease and sickness became another enemy of the defending troops of Bataan. The defeat was just a matter of time. On February 22nd, 1942, President Roosevelt ordered General MacArthur flown to Australia to take command of Allied forces in the Pacific area. On March the 12th, MacArthur, in one of the great moments of the war, escaped Japanese naval blockades and with a party of 21 made his way from the Philippine Islands. Said MacArthur upon his arrival in Australia, "The President has ordered me to proceed from Corregidor to Australia to organize an offensive against Japan, a primary purpose of which is the relief of the Philippine Islands. I came through, and I shall return." General Jonathan Wainwright was given command of United States forces in the Philippines. On April 9th, United States forces on Bataan surrendered. The War Department reported that the remaining forces under General Wainwright had retreated to the little island of Corregidor in the middle of Manila Bay. Now on April 10th came more misery for the captured defenders of Bataan. There began what history has called the Marches of Death, or the Bataan Death Marches. Americans and Filipinos of all ranks were marched under a pitiless sun to the confinement camps as much as 100 miles away. Here is a survivor of the Bataan Death March.
We started the death march in groups of 100, about 3,000 or 4,000 of us in the line, marching by fours. About 3 Jap guards to 100 of us. Didn't see any officers, mostly those superior privates of theirs, men with 2 or 3 stars in their uniform. They'd slap our soldiers across the face, beat them up. I saw one of our men carrying a new pair of shoes. He sat down to take off his old shoes. The Japs came up and took away both pairs. That lieutenant walked 7 days in the death march, and when we arrived at the end of the journey, he didn't have feet, just a mass of infected blisters. I saw a Jap truck pass and watched a Jap poke his rifle butt out and knock one of our officers into the ditch. I saw a tank deviate its course to hit a Martian American prisoner and literally crushed him into that road of death. Nothing to eat all day, nothing to drink. Some of the men drank from water buffalo wallows. They were so thirsty. I thought what most of us thought. Why in hell did I surrender? We thought it would be a blessing if we were shot. I saw an enlisted man go insane from the sun and malaria. The last I saw, the Japs were hitting him with those rifle butts. A well-trained pig wouldn't stand it. I saw dead Americans and Filipinos in the ditches at the side of the road, far behind the lines. They had been killed after the surrender. Our doctors, half dead themselves, tried to take care of the dying. The only way you could tell a live American from a dead one was to see whether his heart was beating.
Now all was tragedy on Corregidor. The remnants of the fighting force lived like moles in the underground tunnels of Corregidor. Corregidor, a fort, an island at the entrance to Manila Bay. Corregidor, pounded by tons of shells and bombs in never-ending volleys. Corregidor, doomed to destruction. Corregidor, one of the great military performances in American history. Corregidor, to finally surrender on May 6, 1942. To the microphone came the gaunt, haggard General Jonathan Wainwright.
This is Lieutenant General Wainwright. Subject, surrender. It became apparent that the garrison of these places would be eventually destroyed by aerial and artillery bombardment and by infantry supported by tanks which have overwhelmed Corregidor. After leaving General Homer with no agreement between us, I decided to accept, in the name of humanity, his proposal. You will therefore be guided accordingly, and will, repeat, will, surrender all troops under your command to the proper Japanese officers. This decision, on my part, you will realize, was forced upon me by means entirely beyond my control.
So the Philippine Islands had fallen, and with them went the knowledge that the war would be long and hard and costly. And with their fall went the remembrance of the courage of the defenders of Bataan and Corregidor. And with their fall came the remembrance of the words of MacArthur that he shall return. On October 21st, 1944, American forces under the command of General MacArthur returned to the Philippines just 2.5 years after the tragic defeat. On January 9th, 1945, the island of Luzon was invaded, and on February 3rd, Manila, the capital city of the Philippine Islands, was recaptured. In the dramatic flag-raising ceremony, General Douglas MacArthur spoke.
It might be appropriate to mention that many of the men who left Corregidor with General MacArthur are present here today. From this beautiful city, I now solemnly declare, Mr. President, the full powers and responsibilities under the Constitution restored to the Commonwealth, whose seat is here reestablished as provided by law. Your country thus is again at liberty to pursue its destiny to an honored position in the family of free nations.
The Philippine Islands had been avenged. The marches of death had been avenged. Corregidor and Bataan had been avenged. At war's end, the Philippine Islands would receive their independence, promised them by treaty with the United States in the year 1934 to become effective 10 years later. The timetable was 1 year late, a year no Filipino would hold the United States accountable for. The Philippine Islands were free, independent, and a sovereign nation among the family of nations. The Westinghouse Broadcasting Company has brought you the Philippine Islands, their death, their life, the most dramatic and tragic period of World War II. This program was written, produced, and directed by Bud Greenspan. My name is David Parrish.
Westinghouse Broadcasting Company brings you The Sound of War, the actual sound record of World War II. 2,191 days from the time Hitler's Panzer divisions moved across the Polish borders to the ceremony of the Japanese surrender aboard the United States battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay. World War II, the most terrible period of death and destruction in the long history of man. World War II, a drama preserved for all time through the medium of radio, an era never to be forgotten.
Tonight, V-Day, the beginning of the end. It is June 1944, and the Allies are on the march. It is almost 5 years since the German army invaded Poland, and just a few months short of 3 years since the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Great Britain, fighting alone after the fall of France, was soon joined by Russia in early 1941. And then by the United States after the Japanese attack. Now the three great powers were systematically chipping away at the Nazi Empire. From the east, it was the massive avalanche of Russian strength. From the south and west, it was Great Britain and the United States. Everywhere in the world in June of 1944, the Allies were on the offensive. Leading up to these moments were two great victories told by the Prime Minister of Great Britain, Winston Churchill. First, it was Africa, then Egypt. Now it was June 4th, 1944. It is just 6 days short of 4 years since June 10th, 1940, that President Franklin Delano Roosevelt spoke these words.
On this 10th day of June, 1940, the hand that held the dagger has struck it into the back of its neighbor.
Now it is June 4th, and Judgment Day for the Italian nation is at hand.
Allied troops have entered the eternal city of Rome. Sporadic resistance by the Germans continues. The Fifth Army has battled every inch of the way and entered the Italian capital after an artillery duel 6 miles from the city. Details just in disclose that the spearheads of Allied forces entering Rome were formed of American troops. The city was entered by the way of the Via Casalina, a famous highway into an historic city, the first European capital to be reached by Allied forces.
Now events move quickly. June 5th, 9 a.m. There are rumors throughout the free world. Rumors that have been circulating for many weeks. Rumors that have to do with code name Operation Overlord, the invasion of Western Europe. It is June 5th, 3 p.m. A coded message is sent to the French underground. The message, the arrow pierces steel. The meaning, the invasion of Fortress Europe is at hand. It is Tuesday, June 6th, 3:32 a.m.
A bulletin, London. A naval officer just returned to Supreme Allied Headquarters from the French invasion beaches reports that all main points have been gained and that reinforcements are pouring across the channel in an unprecedented stream.
It is 10 a.m. Tuesday, June 6, 1944. D-Day has come. The French invasion beaches are still not secure. It is less than 10 hours since the first Allied soldier touched French soil. Select men from the American 101st and 82nd Airborne Divisions. Now President Franklin Delano Roosevelt speaks to the nation and the world.
Last night, when I spoke with you about the fall of Rome, I knew at that moment that troops of the United States and our allies were crossing the Channel in another and greater operation.
Under a protecting umbrella of Allied aircraft, the Americans and British dug in on the 5 invasion beaches. The invasion beaches, called by the simple-sounding names. The British securing the east flank, protecting Gold Beach, Juno Beach, and Sword Beach. The Americans to hold the west flank, protecting Omaha and Utah beaches. And the President led the nation in prayer.
Almighty God, our sons, pride of our nation, this day have set upon a mighty endeavor, a struggle to preserve our republic, our religion, and our civilization, and to set free a suffering humanity. Lead them straight and true. Give strength to their arms, stoutness to their hearts, steadfastness in their faith. They will need thy blessings. Their road will be long and hard. For the enemy is strong. He may hurl back our forces. Success may not come with rushing speed, but we shall return again and again. And we know that by thy grace and by the righteousness of our cause, our sons will triumph. They will be sore tried by night and by day, without rest, until the victory is won. The darkness will be rent by noise and flame. Men's souls will be shaken with the violences of war. With thy blessing, we shall prevail over the unholy forces of our enemy. Help us to conquer the apostles of greed and racial arrogances. Lead us to the saving of our country, and with our sister nations into a world unity that will spell a sure peace. A peace invulnerable to the schemings of unworthy men. And a peace that will let all men live in freedom, reaping the just rewards of their honest toil. Thy will be done, Almighty God.
D+1. 36,000 men ashore on Utah Beach, 34,000 on Omaha, 83,000 on the British-held beaches of Gold, Juno, and Sword. Off the 5 landing beaches of Normandy, 5,300 ships of every size and shape. There was terrible war at sea as well as on land.
Well, the sea has gone down this afternoon of June 7th and is now running very quietly with the path of the moon across it. Stretched all around us in the darkness are the shapes of the ships of the convoys. The ack fire is going up from warships out to sea from us in the next lane, and we could hear the harsh motor noise of the German plane or planes overhead. Streaks of tracers are now shooting up and flashing on the sea all over our heads. And I'm getting down off this roof under cover. Now it dies down for a moment as the plane seems to have passed beyond us and the tracers disappear. Here comes more German planes back again. The tracers are rising up on all sides now. Now the motor dies away. Or the motors. The fire keeps changing the Nazi plane as it goes down over the convoy. Just a minute ago, at the end of the other wave that came over, we shot down one of our own barrage balloons. Fell down into the sea. No particular harm done. There's the siren signal. The DQ General Quarters is over. The moon's come out.
It is still D+1 off the Normandy invasion beaches. Now one of the most fantastic broadcasts in history. The actual description of a German plane being shot down by the invasion convoy.
Here we go again. Another plane's come over. Right over our port side. Tracers are making an arc right over our bow now. Disappearing into the clouds before they burst. Looks like we're going to have a night tonight. Get them to our boys! Something burning is falling down through the sky. And circling down. Maybe a hit plane. There we go. They got one. They got one. We got that one. It's got right here. Did we? Yeah. Put this one. Great blotch of fire came down and is smoldering now just off our port side in the sea. The lights of that burning Nazi plane are just twinkling now in the sea and going out. When the tracer starts up again and there's warning of another plane coming in.
It is still D+1. The first stories of the opening minutes on the 5 invasion beaches are now being told. How did the men react when they hit the beaches? A sailor on a landing barge tells his story.
Well, it seemed to me that they just didn't seem to worry about it. They went ashore, slowly, walked around, took the jobs, just as if they were on 42nd Street, just like I go out down sometimes to go window shopping.
What about the wounded? Those men who were hit by the great concentration of Germany's coastal defenses.
Well, I never heard them up. I didn't understand. They don't cry. They don't moan about pain, or they don't ask for any help. They just sit there, try to hang on to their jaw or whatever part of them is wounded, and they don't say anything.
Now, for a few moments, the war shifts to the Pacific area.
We're speaking to you from the hold of a
Navy transport several miles off Guam in the Western Pacific.
What you are about to hear is not a radio drama. You are listening to a broadcast that took place on the eve of battle.
Tomorrow morning at dawn, American Marines will depart from this ship and move ashore to take back that island from the Japanese, who seized it from us 2.5 years ago. Tonight, on the eve of this new invasion, we've taken you into the living quarters of some of the Marines who will storm the Guam beaches tomorrow. They are gathered around us, one playing San Antonio Rose on the harmonica. Just as on occasion, during this sea voyage, he has played for the other fellows. Down here in the lights of the hold are the men who are going to do the fighting. Are you married?
No.
Got a girl back there?
Few.
A few.
A few.
Have you been in combat before?
Yeah, I have once.
Nothing serious, though, huh?
No.
Nothing like tomorrow.
Get the Purple Heart?
Did you get the Purple Heart? Somebody wants to know?
No, not quite.
Well, let's hope you don't this time.
I hope so.
What kind of work do you do in the Marines? What will you be doing tomorrow?
Military secret.
It's a military secret, somebody says. Is that right?
Well, it's probably good.
All right. Incidentally, we cannot give you the names of these men because of military security at this time. But maybe somebody back home will recognize a voice.
It is July 19th, 1944. The place off the island of Guam. The first United States possession to fall to the Japanese after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Guam, 1,155 miles south of Tokyo. American forces were now at the approaches to Japan's inner perimeter. The defenses in front of the home islands. The men will soon storm ashore. H hour is but 4 hours away. What are the men talking about on the eve of the invasion?
You've been taking care of laundry on here.
Right-ho.
Are your prices pretty low, do you think?
Well, I think they're reasonable, but some people don't, I don't guess. But I think they're lucky to even get their clothes washed.
Well, now, I gave you some of my clothes, and they came back starched.
And iron.
That's the first time I've had any starched clothes overseas.
Well, you know, it's this little political pull there, you know.
The invasion of Guam has begun. One of the Marines, moving in on a half-track, has a wire recorder attached to his back. This broadcast is taking place a half-mile from the landing beach. Japanese fire is hitting all around the attacking Marines.
Well, it's up to my knees. I think my pistol got wet. I don't know. It's pretty high. I'm moving away from the half-track now. The men are motioning to each other to move forward. The surface of the coral is quite level, although it's bumpy, but it's not, at least not jagged, not full of foam. There's a lot of something growing underneath. The half-track's moving very slowly. It's about a half a mile to the beach. The men are all spread out. They look pretty good. It's a slow picture of these Marines. Boys, you know, from your own hometown, there's a lot of fire around us.
The Marines are now ashore on Guam. We are now in a tank. The tank is moving forward against Japanese snipers and Japanese pillboxes, clearing the way for the Marines on foot. The broadcast is imperfect. The tanker is saying, "Turn your turret on, will you? Right back here. Center your turret."
Turn your turret on, will you? Right back here. Center your turret.
The tank has spotted a Japanese mortar behind a tree. Listen now to the terrible sounds of war and death. The tanker is saying, "Get a mortar right behind that tree. Right behind. Oh, no, a little further. See where that green thing is right there? Fire a burst of machine gun."
Got a mortar right behind that tree.
Now he continues on. Little high, low, low, right there. There, you got him. You, that's it, you got him.
Too high, low, right there. There, you got it. That's it, you got him. Another one right in there.
Now the end of a Japanese sniper. The tanker says, another one right in there. A bit lower, that's it. Put it right through the tree, a little lower. He's still wiggling.
Another one right in there. A little lower, that's it. Put it right through the tree, a little lower. Still wiggling.
D+5. 80 miles of bridgehead now held by the Americans and the British. D+11. More than 500,000 Allied soldiers have gone ashore on the French invasion coast. D+20. 1 million men now on Hitler's fortress Europe. It is July 20th, 1944. 6 weeks since D-Day. Now more amazing news from inside Germany. An assassination attempt against the life of Chancellor Adolf Hitler. He is seriously wounded by a bomb explosion. Says Adolf Hitler, the German people are unworthy of my greatness. No one appreciates what I have done. 12 days later, Prime Minister Winston Churchill says, I no longer feel bound to deny that victory may come, perhaps soon. It is August 25th, 1944. 2 months, 19 days since the Allies landed on French soil. 4 years, 2 months, 11 days since the Nazi army marched into undefended Paris.
This is John McVeigh in Paris. Those bells you can hear are the bells of Notre Dame Cathedral. They've just begun ringing about 2 or 3 minutes ago, and they're ringing a chime of thanksgiving that French troops have entered the city. We just came in this morning with the first correspondent, the first American car to come in with these French troops. And we've just had a big street fight here right in the square in front of the cathedral. And now all the church bells in the city are beginning. I can hear 3 or 4 more churches, and I'll let you hear them. We've just had a big fight here in the square in front of Notre Dame. And we're all lying on our stomachs and hoping for the best, but we hope that's all over now, and that these bells that we hear are a sign that the last German resistance in Paris is cleaned up. Boys are ready for battle because most of them have been 4 years away from Paris, and you can judge how they're feeling when they come back and see their own folk again. The French boys are dressed in American uniform. They look like Americans, but when they open their mouths, the people know they're French. These bells are pealing out a chime of thanksgiving that after all these years, Paris is again free. When people found we were the first American car to come into the city, they overwhelmed us with kindness. They gave us wine, flowers, food, even gave us cigarettes, their French cigarettes, that cost them about $3 or $4 a packet. You can hear the crowd laugh here. Vous êtes content que nous sommes venus? You see for yourself how happy everyone is that we're here. He says we're very happy that the Allies are here. All right. All right. He says, all right, everything is fine. Now I see a very pretty nurse here. Vous êtes content aussi? Oh, oui, très content. Bonjour. She said, very happy to know. And he says, we hope that the Germans will be pushed farther back.
Now another dramatic broadcast. It is the following day. General Charles de Gaulle, the symbol of France's defiance when the Nazis had overrun the country, walks proudly along the streets and boulevards of Paris. Says de Gaulle, "I go on foot. This is not a day for passing in review with trumpets sounding." He is about to enter the Cathedral of Notre Dame.
The general is now turned to face the square in this huge crowd of Philippines.
There is firing going on in the street. You will now hear the actual shot fired in the assassination attempt of General de Gaulle.
Is being presented to people. It's being received. It's being received. Even while the general is marching into the cathedral.
At this point, the news commentator, in dashing to safety, unplugged the wires of his recorder. Now he is back on the air.
Well, that was one of the most dramatic scenes I've ever seen. Just as General de Gaulle was about to enter the Cathedral of Notre Dame, firing started all over the place. I'm afraid we couldn't get you the noise of that firing because I was overwhelmed by a rush of people who were trying to seek shelter, and my cable parted from my microphone. But I fell just near General de Gaulle, and I managed to pick myself up. General de Gaulle was trying to control the crowds rushing into the cathedral. He walked straight ahead into what appeared to me to be a hail of fire, but he went straight ahead without hesitation, his shoulders flung back, and walked right down the central aisle, even while the bullets were pouring around him.
So in less than 3 months, there was new great success for the Allies. The fall of Rome, V-Day, Guam recaptured, Paris again in Allied hands. The war was going well. The free men of the Allies were on the march. The Westinghouse Broadcasting Company has brought you V-Day and the summer of 1944. The voices and sounds of the most dramatic period of the 20th century. This program was written, produced, and directed by Bud Greenspan. My name is David Perry.
Westinghouse Broadcasting Company brings you The Sound of War, the actual sound record of World War II. 2,191 days from the time Hitler's Panzer divisions moved across the Polish borders to the ceremony of the Japanese surrender aboard the United States battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay. World War II, the most terrible period of death and destruction in the long history of man. World War II, a drama preserved for all time through the medium of radio, an era never to be forgotten.
Tonight, V-eDay, victory in Europe. It is June 6th, 1944. The time, 3:32 a.m. The situation, Allied forces are moving ashore on the 5 invasion beaches of the Normandy coast. The first 5 days told the story. In those 5 days, the major German coastal defenses were met head-on and overrun. The Allies would push through France, the gateway to Germany, the same battleground of 4 years before. Only this time, the situation was reversed. This time, Great Britain was going forward. With the United States as an ally, the democracies were on the march. The attacking Allies were powerful, devastating, relentless. They would not be denied.
This is James Cassidy with the American forces in France. Today, American forces in strength are within actual sight of Germany. Some of them in patrols have already crossed into Germany itself. I learned that the American patrols had gone over the border when I went up to the front lines of the Third Army late last night. Because of heavy enemy resistance between Metz and Nancy, I was unable to proceed further. But early today, with advanced units of the Third Army, I was able to look across into Germany itself. A vivid demonstration of how far this tremendous army has gone and how fast it has traveled.
And now the final issue was at hand. A common goal. The unconditional surrender of all the Axis powers. The utter defeat and surrender of Germany, Italy, and Japan. The goal of the Allies? President Roosevelt.
What is now being won in battle must not be lost by lack of vision, or by lack of faith, or by division among ourselves and our allies. We must and will continue to be united with our allies in a powerful world organization which is ready and able to keep the peace by force if necessary. Future days, which we seek to make secure, we look forward to a world founded upon four essential human freedoms. The first is freedom of speech and expression everywhere in the world. The second is freedom of every person to worship God in his own way everywhere in the world. The third is freedom from want, which translated into world terms means economic understandings which will secure to every nation a healthy, peacetime life for its inhabitants everywhere in the world. The fourth is freedom from fear, which translated into world terms means a worldwide reduction of armaments to such a point and in such a thorough fashion that no nation will be in a position to commit an act of physical aggression against any neighbor anywhere in the world.
The Americans and British were now on the march from the west. From the east, the Russians were converging on German territory. The race was on. Who would get to Berlin first? Berlin, the capital of Nazi Germany. Berlin, the home of the Reichstag and the city of former Nazi greatness. Berlin, the city that would remain in turmoil long after the last shots of World War II were fired, long after Nazi Germany had crumpled. For the Americans and British, the most formidable barrier would be the Rhine River, the gateway to the heart of the German homeland. The Rhine River, treacherous and angry. No invader had ever crossed the river in war since Napoleon in 1805. The Rhine River, its east bank defended by high mountains from where the Germans could look down upon the oncoming Allies. The Rhine River, its many bridges blown up by the retreating Germans. The assault must be made by water. An incredible happening. It is March 7, 1945. Between the German cities of Bonn and Koblenz lies the town of Remagen. At Remagen is the Ludendorff Bridge, connecting the west and east banks of the Rhine. At 3:30 p.m., March 7th, the Germans sent off a preliminary charge to destroy the bridge. The explosion was weak. The bridge remained intact. 20 minutes later, Sergeant Alexander Drabik and his platoon, members of the 1st American Army, reached the Ludendorff Bridge. They were amazed to see it still standing. Then they moved across. Miraculously, the explosives designed to blow up the bridge did not go off. In 10 minutes, 100 troops of the 1st Army were across. At the end of 24 hours, 8,000 troops were poised for the attack on the eastern bank. Sergeant Alexander Drabik, the first man across.
They told me later that the bridge was only 250 yards across. It seemed like 250 miles. There were 2 other platoons ahead of us, but they'd got pinned down part of the way across the bridge, and then they sent us out.
How did Sergeant Drabik know he was the first man across?
Well, that was pretty simple. There wasn't anybody in front of me.
The Rhine was crossed. The 1st United States Army was again on the move. They had a rendezvous now at the Elbe River. Coming from the east was the 1st Ukrainian-Russian Army. The newspapers headlined the coming meeting. The 9th American Army from the north was hammering on a frontal plane towards Berlin. The 1st White Russian Army was moving in from the northeast. Berlin was doomed. On an hourly basis, the news bulletins told of the impending link-up between the Americans and the Russians. Nothing short of earth-shattering news could take the spotlight away from the glorious victory that would free all of Europe.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin from CBS World News. A press association has just announced that President Roosevelt is dead. The president died of a cerebral hemorrhage. All we know so far is that the president died at Warm Springs in Georgia.
The news stunned the free world. In New York, the Philharmonic Orchestra canceled its concert at Carnegie Hall. The last time a cancellation took place, when Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. At Hitler's headquarters, Joseph Goebbels ran to the Führer with the news, "My Führer, I congratulate you. Roosevelt is dead. It is written in the stars that the second half of April will be the turning point." So said Joseph Goebbels. The newspapers in the United States published a small obituary notice. In the casualty lists of the day under Army, Navy dead, the name Roosevelt, Franklin D., Commander-in-Chief, wife, Mrs. Anna Eleanor Roosevelt. A few days later, the free world paid its last respects to the Commander-in-Chief. Arthur Godfrey was at the microphone.
The drums are wrapped in black crape and are muffled, as you can hear. And the pace of the musicians is so slow. And behind them, these are Navy boys. And now just coming past the Treasury, I can see the horses drawing the caisson. And most generally, folks having as tough a time as I am trying to see it. And behind us is the car bearing the man on whose shoulders now falls the terrific burdens and responsibilities that were handled so well by the man to whose body we're paying our last respects now. God bless him, President Truman. We return you now to the studio.
It is April 25th, 1945. Another ironical note in the recorded history of the world. In San Francisco, the first meeting of the United Nations. In Germany, 75 miles south of Berlin, in the town of Torgau near the River Elbe, patrols of the 69th Division, United States 5th Corps, and elements of the Russian 58th Guards Division linked up. The noose had been drawn tight.
After long journeys, toils, and victories across the lands and oceans, across so many deadly battlefields, the armies of the great Allies have traversed Germany and have joined hands together.
It is April 28, 1945. Benito Mussolini is executed by Italian partisans. 2 days later, Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun commit suicide. The same day, the Russians reach the German capital. They raise their flag over the Reichstag. It is May 1st, 1945. Berlin has fallen. The following day, German armies in Italy surrender. The world awaits the momentous news. May 3rd, May 4th, May 5th, May 6th. There are rumors, but no official word. It is May 7th.
The National Broadcasting Company delays the start of all its programs to bring you a special bulletin. It was announced in San Francisco half an hour ago by a high American official not identified as saying that Germany has surrendered unconditionally to the Allies, no strings attached, and that the announcement is to be made formally by General Eisenhower. I'll repeat that. The formal announcement has not yet been made, but the official says that Germany has surrendered unconditionally to America, Britain, and Russia.
In London, the Supreme Allied Commander, General Dwight D. Eisenhower.
February 1943. The late President Roosevelt and Premier Churchill met in Casablanca. There they pronounced the formula of unconditional surrender for the Axis powers. In Europe, that formula has now been fulfilled. The Allied force, which invaded Europe on June 6, 1944, has, with his great Russian allies and forces advancing from the south, utterly defeated the Germans by land, sea, and air.
King George VI of Great Britain.
Let us turn our thoughts on this day of triumph and proud sorrow, and then take up our work again, resolved as a people to do nothing unworthy of those who died for us, and to make the world such a world as they would have desired for their children and for ours.
All that is great and traditional in the kingdom whose dominion extends beyond the seas is found in the symbol of their king, George VI.
The center of a family of nations, this is in a sense a family occasion. The head of the family has just spoken, and now, as always on great occasions, as in 1918 in the Jubilee of the coronation, the people of London have come together to pay their tribute to the royal family. They're waiting now eagerly, they're shouting, "We want the king, we want the king." They're surging forward, hoping to see him at any moment on the royal balcony over the grand entrance, from the center room. We hope that the king and queen will come out. The crowd are cheering. Listen to them. And at any second now, we hope to see
Their Majesties. And now, I believe they're coming. They haven't yet appeared, but the crowd in the center are cheering madly. Handkerchiefs, flags, hands waving, and here they come. First, Her Majesty the Queen, it comes into view. Then the King in the uniform of an Admiral of the Fleet. The two princesses standing on the balcony. Listen to the crowd.
President of the United States, Harry Truman.
I only wish that Franklin D. Roosevelt had lived to witness this day. The flags of freedom fly all over Europe.
Surrender ceremony, an eyewitness.
Hello, BBC. This is Thomas Cadet reporting from Supreme Headquarters. Yes, I saw it. In the small hours of this morning, May the 7th, 1945, I saw the formal acknowledgement by Germany's present leaders, military leaders of their country's complete and utter defeat by land, in the air, and at sea. At exactly 2:39 a.m., the Germans entered the room amid a complete silence that was very soon broken by the activities of the photographers. General Jodl came first, an elderly, slightly bald man of medium height with a thin, red-tipped nose and protruding ears, but with some dignity of bearing. He was wearing a field-gray tunic with gold epaulettes, riding breeches of the same color, with a vivid red stripe down the side, and riding boots. Admiral Friedeburg followed in sober navy blue, and then Oxenius, the aide-de-camp, brought up the rear. Three advanced to the table where they were met standing by the Allied delegates, whose Chief General Beadle Smith then invited them to be seated, with a gesture that showed neither warmth nor incorrection. In fact, the American's face remained like a mask throughout. And then came the signatures, both the two principal delegates on either side using fountain pens provided by General Eisenhower. They were streamlined, gold-capped affairs in the modern American style. And the German party then left the room. They were immediately taken to another room where General Eisenhower himself and his deputy, Air Chief Marshal Tedder, were awaiting them. The interview was brief. No salutes, only a formal bow from either side. "Have you understood the terms?" said Eisenhower. "Yes," said Jodl. "Will you carry them out?" Again the answer was yes. And that was that. The Germans were in the room for exactly 2 minutes.
Final shot, the final act of war, the end of Nazi Germany. 5 years, 8 months, and 7 days of terrible war. From the time the German Panzer divisions moved into Poland to the surrender ceremony in the French city of Reims. Times Square in New York to Piccadilly Circus in London, the Place de la Concorde in Paris, the Nevsky Prospect in Moscow. The war was over. The Allies had won. And now thoughts turned to the Far East and Japan. The Prime Minister.
save the king.
Westinghouse Broadcasting Company has brought you V-eDay, Victory in Europe, the most dramatic and tragic period of our time. This program was written, produced, and directed by Bud Greenspan. My name is David Perry.
Westinghouse Broadcasting Company brings you The Sound of War, the actual sound record of World War II. 2,191 days from the time Hitler's panzer divisions moved across the Polish borders to the ceremony of the Japanese surrender aboard the United States battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay. World War II, the most terrible period of death and destruction in the long history of man. World War II, a drama preserved for all time through the medium of radio, an era never to be forgotten.
Tonight, the music of the war. On September 1st, 1939, Nazi panzer divisions moved across the Polish borders in what was the official beginning of World War II. It was just 6 years before the Chancellor Adolf Hitler took over the destinies of the German people. In the early days of Nazi history, there were the elite organizations that by terror and power kept in check the populace. One organization had so contributed to the death and misery that was to be World War II, that it was cited as one of the 6 Nazi organizations that would be placed on trial at the Nuremberg war crimes trials at the end of the war. The organization? The Sturmabteilung, the Nazi SA. The stormtrooper organization which included the masses of early Hitler followers. The SA, full of terror and pageantry. The SA, loyal and unbending. The SA, perpetrators of perhaps the worst crimes in the terrible history of the Nazi regime. You will now hear one of the most dramatic yet terrible recordings ever made. It was made in Nazi Germany a year before Hitler's legions marched into Poland. The voices belong to members of an elite SA organization known as Sturmabteilung 33. This music is not played to perpetuate the memory of Nazi Germany or glorify one of the most infamous organizations that history has ever known. Rather, they are played because it is the living sound of history. An era never to be forgotten. An era that was not a figment of the imagination. An era that did take place. You will first hear a march. It is called Heil Hitler dir, a march in honor of the Chancellor, Adolf Hitler. Dedicated to Adolf Hitler. Now we are in the Reichstag in Berlin. Hitler has just asked his ministers for a declaration of war against Poland. The request is late. German armies 4.5 hours earlier had crossed into Poland and were already killing Poles and bombing their cities.
Those assembled arise and stand to greet the arrival of the German Führer. The applause greets the Führer who has just arrived in the Kohl Opera House to address the Reichstag, which has been called an extraordinary session. We are expecting that Prime Minister Göring in a very few moments will open formally the session in the Reichstag. Sieg Heil to the Führer. Reichstag is present singing the German national anthem. Deutschland, Deutschland über alles. This will be followed by the Horst Wessel song.
Now Stormtrooper Group 33 again. They sing the Horst Wessel song. now one of the popular Nazi songs of the day. It seems incongruous today that in almost hymn-like, church-like reverence, the Führer was extolled on a daily basis. You will now hear God Save Our Führer, Adolf Hitler.
Gott sei mit unserem Führer, Gott segne seine Hand, Gott schütze unser deutsches, heißgeliebtes
On April 9th, 1940, Nazi Germany invaded Norway. Five days later, British troops invaded the area around the great Norwegian city of Trondheim. But in 2 months, after being badly beaten by the well-trained forces that had tasted victory in Poland, the British retreated back to the safety of British shores. The Battle of Norway was over. Norway, now a strategic lift-off point for German air machines to strike at all of Scandinavia, British shipping, and even the home island. Norway, a home for Germany's naval and submarine fleets. Norway, a much-needed food-producing country for the German armed forces. Norway, to be led by the infamous Vidkun Quisling. Norway, to wait more than 5 years when they once again could hear their national anthem. On May 28, 1940, King Leopold of Belgium asked the Germans for surrender terms. And 4 days earlier, the Nazi panzer divisions had crossed the Belgian borders in a simultaneous attack against Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and France. As the gallant Belgians retreated behind what was supposed to be an impregnable fortress, their national anthem was played and replayed over the radio. The main part of the Belgian defense was the great fortress at Ebon-Emael, called by most military experts the most fortified single stronghold in the world. Ebon-Emael fell in 36 hours. On May 27, 1940, 400,000 weary and beaten Belgian soldiers laid down their arms. King Leopold had surrendered to the Germans to avoid further bloodshed. And now the time had come for France. The France of the famed Maginot Line, the France of Marshal Foch, the France that had defended Paris in World War I with its famed army of taxicabs. On June 22, 1940, France surrendered to the Nazis. France in agony. One of the last times the French national anthem was played. And now Great Britain stood alone. The island empire and its dominions would await the Nazi attack. Operation Sea Lion was the code name Hitler used for the invasion of Great Britain. And defending the home islands were the men and machines of the Royal Air Force and the men and ships of the Royal Navy. The Royal Navy, all that is great and traditional within the British Empire. The Royal Navy, mistress of the seas. The Royal Navy, strong, defiant, weighty. Rule Britannia. On June 22nd, 1941, Germany invaded Russia. President And now Great Britain was joined in the fight. And along with the two great allies was the country that lives on friendly borders with the United States and with century-old ties with the mother country. And the war in Europe would be over, and the Prime Minister would announce the news. And his rallying cry would as always be,
"Advance, Britannia! Long live the cause of freedom! God save the King!"
Westinghouse Broadcasting Company has brought you Music of the War, some of the most dramatic happenings in the most terrible of all conflicts. This program was written, produced, and directed by Bud Greenspan. My name is David Perry.
Westinghouse Broadcasting Company brings you The Sound of War, the actual sound record of World War II. 2,191 days from the time Hitler's Panzer divisions moved across the Polish borders to the ceremony of the Japanese surrender aboard the United States battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay. World War II, the most terrible period of death and destruction in the long history of man. World War II, a drama preserved for all time through the medium of radio, an era never to be forgotten.
Tonight, the most dramatic voices and sounds of the war. World War II was the first conflict in the history of man to have preserved for all time the sound record of its terrible, tragic moments. It is an unequaled record, for the course of the war is easily heard in the voices and sounds of the men and women and children who lived and died. And in their voices and words are sadness, hope, and eventual joy that was the transition from frustration and defeat to complete victory. This, then, is the war as we know it, with the people, many of whom have long since gone, who lived its terrible moments. It is September 29th, 1938. The scene, the Führer's Palace, the Führerhaus in Munich. In the most historic international meeting since World War I, to save the peace of the world. Four men sit and talk over the fate of Czechoslovakia. The men, Chancellor Adolf Hitler of Germany, Il Duce Benito Mussolini of Italy, Premier Edouard Daladier of France, and Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain of Great Britain. And what about Czechoslovakia? Proud, majestic Czechoslovakia. Their young men poised to defend the homeland against the Nazi oppression. Their leaders ready to sound the trumpet. Their populace ready to die on the land created for them by Great Britain and France after World War I. Czechoslovakia now stands alone. They are not invited to Munich. When the four-power meeting is over, Czechoslovakia was dead. They lost 1/3 of their nation, 1/3 of their population, all of their military fortifications. For all intents and purposes, they were eliminated from the face of Europe. Returning to London, Chamberlain waved the famous White Agreement paper that would result in peace in our time.
This morning,
It is now September 1st, 1939, less than 1 year later. Since the Munich Pact, Czechoslovakia has been fully swallowed and ceases to exist. Germany has signed an unbelievable non-aggression pact with Russia, and now the Nazis need not fear an attack from the east. So now Adolf Hitler looks east to Poland. Poland, a scavenger nation, grabbing land from helpless Czechoslovakia after Munich under the approving eye of Chancellor Hitler. Poland. A continuation of what Winston Churchill said a year before, after Munich. The first sip, the first foretaste that will be proffered to us year by year. Poland. Next on Hitler's timetable of world domination.
Wie ein Mann erhebt sich die Versammlung der alten Mitkämpfer Adolf Hitlers.
Those assembled arise and stand to greet the arrival of the German Führer. The applause greets the Führer who has just arrived in the Kohl Opera House to address the Reichstag, which has been called an extraordinary session. We are expecting that Prime Minister Göring in a very few moments will open formally the session in the Reichstag.
Wenn Polen versuchen sollte, auf dem Weg zollpolitischer Maßnahmen Danzig wirtschaftlich zu vernichten, dass dann Deutschland nicht mehr länger untätig zusehen könnte.
I told the Polish ambassador 3 weeks ago that if the situation continued as it was, if Danzig were persecuted and it were attempted by Poland to ruin Danzig economically, the situation could not be tolerated.
We interrupt this broadcast of Adolf Hitler's speech just momentarily to report a dispatch from Paris which says that Premier Daladier of France has now called the French Council of Ministers for an emergency meeting which is to take place just 10 minutes from now at 5:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time.
Ich habe mich daher nun entschlossen, mit Polen in der gleichen Sprache zu reden, mit der Polen und seit
I therefore resolve to speak to Poland in the same language in which Poland has addressed us for such a long time.
Sie wissen, dass Russland und Deutschland von 2 verschiedenen Doktrinen regiert werden. Es war nur eine Frage, die geklärt werden musste.
Once again, we interrupt very briefly this talk by Chancellor Hitler to announce that in London, Parliament has been summoned to meet at 6 p.m. in London, which is 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time today.
Nicht nach Deutschland zu exportieren gewinnt. Im selben Augenblick sehe ich keine Veranlassung mehr, dass wir auch noch einmal gegeneinander Stellung nehmen sollen.
I see no reason, says Mr. Hitler, why Russia and Germany should have been enemies any longer.
Polen hat heute Nacht zum ersten Mal auf unserem eigenen Territorium auch mit bereits regulären Soldaten geschossen.
Poland, for the first time this evening, has shot at regular soldiers upon our territory.
Und von jetzt ab wird Bombe mit Bombe vergolten.
From now on, bomb will be met by bomb.
Sieg heil to the Führer. The Reichstag is present singing the German national anthem. Deutschland, Deutschland über alles. This will be followed by the Horst Wessel song.
Germany attacked Poland on September 1st, and the world waited for the moves of France and Great Britain. After 2 days of furious negotiations between London and Paris, there was no turning back. The two allies would honor their treaty with Poland. They would march against Germany. Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain spoke to the British Empire.
This is London. You will now hear a statement by the Prime Minister.
I am speaking to you from the Cabinet Room at 10 Downing Street. This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany. You can imagine what a bitter blow it is to me that all my long struggle to win peace has failed. Yet I cannot believe that there is anything more or anything different that I could have done and that would have been more successful. Up to the very last, it would have been quite possible to have arranged a peaceful and honorable settlement between Germany and Poland. But Hitler would not have it. He had evidently made up his mind to attack Poland whatever happened. And although he now says he put forward reasonable proposals which were rejected by the Poles, that is not a true statement. The proposals were never shown to the Poles, nor to us. And though they were announced in the German broadcast on Thursday night, Hitler did not wait to hear comments on them, but ordered his troops to cross the Polish frontier the next morning. His action shows convincingly that there is no chance of expecting that this man will ever give up his practice of using force to gain his will. He can only be stopped by force. And we and France are today, in fulfillment of our obligations, going to the aid of Poland, who is so bravely resisting this wicked and unprovoked attack upon her people. We have a clear conscience. We have done all that any country could do to establish peace. But a situation in which no word given by Germany's ruler could be trusted, and no people or country could feel itself safe, had become intolerable. And now that we have resolved to finish it, I know that you will all play your part with calmness and courage. At such a moment as this, the assurances of support which we have received from the Empire are a source of profound encouragement to us. When I have finished speaking, certain detailed announcements will be made on behalf of the government. Give these your close attention. Now, may God bless you all, and may He defend the right. For it is evil things that we shall be fighting against. Brute force, bad faith, injustice, oppression, and persecution. And against them I am certain that the right will prevail.
And now into our studio has just come Mr. Elmer Davis. Mr. Davis, I don't know whether you heard Mr. Chamberlain's statement or not. We've all been assembled here so hastily. You did hear it, and so perhaps you would like to come over here to the microphone and take over for a few moments, would you, sir?
Very little to add to the facts in this case. The tone of Mr. Chamberlain was that of a very tired and very saddened man, a man who a year ago gave up not only the safety and liberty of another country, though I do not think he had any idea at the time of how much he was giving up, but gave up a considerable part of the protection that the situation in Europe at that time had afforded to France and England for the sake of peace. Clear up till yesterday, it looked as if he might make greater sacrifices for the sake of peace, as if there might be some possible concession this time as there had been the time before. And you will remember that yesterday it was Mr. Greenwood, the leader of the opposition, who got the cheers in the House of Commons when he rose to speak and cries of "Speak for England." At that time, Mr. Greenwood fully realized the difficulties of Mr. Chamberlain's position and said he was glad he was not in that position himself. It was clear that Mr. Chamberlain, as he said, was not going to give up any single effort to settle this thing peacefully. But it is now his opinion that Hitler would not have it.
In the United States, Americans were in the midst of a long Labor Day weekend. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt spoke to the people by radio.
My countrymen and my friends, tonight my single duty is to speak to the whole of America. Until 4:30 o'clock this morning, I had hoped against hope that some miracle would prevent a devastating war in Europe and bring to an end the invasion of Poland by Germany. For 4 long years, a succession of actual wars and constant crises have shaken the entire world and have threatened in each case to bring on the gigantic conflict, which is today, unhappily, a fact. I myself cannot and do not prophesy the course of events abroad. And the reason is that because I have of necessity such a complete picture of what is going on in every part of the world that I do not dare to do so. And the other reason is that I think it is honest for me to be honest with the people of the United States. I cannot prophesy the immediate economic effect of this new war on our nation. But I do say that no American has the moral right to profiteer at the expense either of his fellow citizens or of the men, the women, and the children who are living and dying in the midst of war in Europe. This nation will remain a neutral nation, but I cannot ask that every American remain neutral in thought as well. Even a neutral has a right to take account of facts. Even a neutral cannot be asked to close his mind or close his conscience. I have said not once, but many times, that I have seen war and that I hate war. I say that again and again. I hope the United States will keep out of this war. I believe that it will. And I give you assurance and reassurance that every effort of your government will be directed toward that end.
As the war moved in, there were young voices and sounds. Children were evacuated from Great Britain and sent to the United States and Canada. There were transatlantic phone calls at Christmas.
Thanks. How are you? I hope you're having a Merry Christmas. Listen, Violet. Yes. Come on, now, don't be silly now.
Just a moment. Mrs. Dollar, just a moment. We'll have Violet for you in just a minute. Here's Ronnie. Here's Ronnie who wants to add a word, and then we'll come back to Violet.
Hello, Mom. Hello, Tom. How are you? I'm going to cry.
All Also from the Empire, there were the voices of the daughters of King George VI, Elizabeth, later to be Queen, and Margaret Rose.
I can truthfully say to you all that we children at home are full of cheerfulness and courage. We are trying to do all we can to help our gallant sailors, soldiers, and airmen. And when peace comes, remember, it will be for us, the children of today, to make the world of tomorrow a better and happier place. My sister is by my side, and we are both going to say good night to you. Come on, Margaret. Good night, children. Good night, and good luck to you all.
And the war moved on, and for the Allies there was terrible defeat. In May of 1940, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain gave up his seals of office.
It was clear that at this critical moment in the war,
of the French armies to make head against and also to strike at this intruding wedge has been proceeding for several days, largely assisted by the magnificent efforts of the Royal Air Force. We must not allow ourselves to be intimidated by the presence of these armored vehicles in unexpected places behind our lines. If they are behind our front, the French are also at many points fighting actively behind theirs. Both sides are therefore in an extremely dangerous position. And if the French army and our own army are well handled, as I believe they will be, if the French retain that genius for recovery and counterattack for which they have so long been famous, and if the British army shows the dogged endurance and solid fighting power of which there have been so many examples in the past, then a sudden transformation of the scene might spring into being. It would be foolish, however, to disguise the gravity of the hour. It would be still more foolish to lose heart and courage, or to suppose that well-trained, well-equipped armies, numbering 3 or 4 millions of men, can be overcome in the space of a few weeks or even months by a scoop or raid of mechanized vehicles, however formidable. We may look with confidence to the stabilization of the front in France and to the general engagement of the masses, which will enable the qualities of the French and British soldiers to be matched squarely against those of their adversaries. For myself, I have invincible confidence in the French army and its leaders. Only a very small part of that splendid army has yet been heavily engaged, and only a very small part of France has yet been invaded. There is good evidence to show that practically the whole of the specialized and mechanized forces of the enemy have been already thrown into the battle, and we know that very heavy losses have been inflicted upon them. No officer or man, no brigade or division which grapples at close quarters with the enemy wherever encountered can fail to make a worthy contribution to the general result. The armies must cast away the idea of resisting attack behind concrete lines or natural obstacles, and must realize that mastery can only be regained by furious and unrelenting assault. And this spirit must not only animate the high command, but must inspire every fighting man. often at serious odds, often at odds, hitherto thought overwhelming, we have been clawing down 3 or 4 to 1 of our enemies. And the relative balance of the British and German air forces is now considerably more favorable to us than at the beginning of the battle. In cutting down the German bombers, we are fighting our own battle, as well as that of France. My confidence in our ability to fight it out to the finish with the German Air Force has been strengthened by the fierce encounters which have taken place and are taking place. At the same time, our heavy bombers are striking nightly at the taproot of German mechanized power and have already inflicted serious damage upon the oil refineries on which the Nazi effort to dominate the world directly depends. There will be many men and many women in this island who, when the ordeal comes upon them, and come it will feel comfort and even a pride that they are sharing the perils of our lads at the front, soldiers, sailors, and airmen, God bless them, and are drawing away for them a part at least of the onslaught they have to bear. Is not this the appointed time for all to make the utmost exertions in their power? Today is Trinity Sunday. Centuries ago, words
There was terrible news from France. In less than 1 month, France would be dying and soon dead. A new name would come forward. General Charles de Gaulle.
Moi, général de Gaulle, j'entreprends ici, en Angleterre, cette tâche nationale. J'invite tous les militaires français des armées de terre, de mer et de l'air. J'invite les ingénieurs et les ouvriers.
General de Gaulle is saying, I, General de Gaulle, undertake this national task here in England. I invite all French fighting men in the Army, Navy, and Air Force. I invite French engineers and French munition workers who may be in British territory or who can contrive to get there to join me. I invite the leaders, the soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the French forces on land, sea, and air, wherever they may be at this moment, to get in touch with me. I call upon all Frenchmen who wish to remain free to listen to me and to follow me. Long live France, in freedom, in honor, in independence.
Now Great Britain was alone, but its strength and defiance and resolution could be found in a voice. Here is a montage. It is a montage of the voice and words of Winston Churchill in the spring, summer, and fall of 1940, when England stood alone and waited for the German attack from across the English Channel.
In order to win the war, Hitler must destroy Great Britain. And all the time, masters of the sea and air, the British Empire, nay, in a certain sense, the whole English-speaking world, will be on his track, bearing with them the swords of justice. Hitler knows that he will have to break us in this island or lose the war. If we can stand up to him, all Europe may be freed, and the life of the world may move forward into broad, sunlit uplands. But if we fail, then the whole world, including the United States, including all that we have known and cared for, will sink into the abyss of a new dark age, made more sinister and perhaps more protracted by the lights of perverted science. And if the Nazi villains drop down upon us from the skies any night,
Great Britain is still alone. But now there are rumblings in the Far East. On December 7th, 1941, Great Britain was joined in the fight.
It has been the pleasure of the National Broadcasting Company to bring you Sammy Kaye's Sunday Serenade, featuring his world-famed swing and sway music. The poem read by Sammy Kaye was When We're Apart by Wilson Darren. Today's broadcast has come to you from our studios in Radio City, New York. From the NBC newsroom in New York, President Roosevelt said in a statement today that the Japanese have attacked the Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, from the air. I'll repeat that. President Roosevelt says that the Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor in Hawaii from the air. This bulletin came to you from the NBC newsroom in New York.
And now the final issue was at hand. A common goal. The unconditional surrender of all the Axis powers. The utter defeat and surrender of Germany, Italy, and Japan. The goal of the Allies? President Roosevelt.
In the future days, which we seek to make secure, we look forward to a world founded upon four essential human freedoms. The first is freedom of speech and expression everywhere in the world. The second is freedom of every person to worship God in his own way everywhere in the world. The third is freedom from want, which translated into world terms means economic understandings which will secure to every nation a healthy, peacetime life for its inhabitants everywhere in the world. The fourth is freedom from fear, which translated into world terms means a worldwide reduction of armaments to such a point and in such a thorough fashion that no nation will be in a position to commit an act of physical aggression against any neighbor anywhere in the world.
and to enforce them. That is our bond of union in His Majesty's government tonight. Thus only, in times like these, can nations preserve their freedom, and thus only can they uphold the cause entrusted to their care. But all depends now upon the whole life strength of the British race, all our associated peoples, and of all our well-wishers in every land, doing their utmost night and day, giving all, daring all, enduring all, to the utmost, to the end. This is no war of chieftains or of princes, of dynasties or national ambitions. It is a war of peoples and of causes. There are vast numbers, not only in this island, but in every land, who will render faithful service in this war, but whose names will never be known, whose deeds will never be recorded. This is a war of the unknown warrior.
Westinghouse Broadcasting Company has brought you the voices and sounds of World War II, the most dramatic and tragic period in the history of man. This program was written, produced, and directed by Bud Greenspan. My name is David Perry.
Westinghouse Broadcasting Company brings you The Sound of War, the actual sound record of World War II. 2,191 days from the time Hitler's Panzer divisions moved across the Polish borders to the ceremony of the Japanese surrender aboard the United States battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay. World War II, the most terrible period of death and destruction in the long history of man. World War II, a drama preserved for all time through the medium of radio, an era never to be forgotten. Tonight, V-jDay, the end of the war. It is May 8th, 1945, and for the first time in more than 5 years, there is peace in Europe. The war in the West is over. Prime Minister Winston Churchill speaks to the British nation and the world.
God save the King.
February 19, 1945, United States Marines landed on Iwo Jima. The island is 8 miles square with no vegetation. Its landing beaches are covered with volcanic ash, rocks, and boulders. The island is ugly and treacherous. It is also only 750 miles from Tokyo. Marine Commander General Holland Smith said during the battle, "The fight was the toughest the Marines have had to face in 168 years." On February 23, 1945, a Marine patrol pushed to the topmost ridge of Mount Suribachi, the key to the southern end of the island. Associated Press photographer Joe Rosenthal was there to snap the photograph of the flag-raising ceremony that turned out to be the most famous photograph of the war. Equally fantastic was the coincidence that saw Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal able to give an eyewitness account of the scene. He, too, was there at ugly Iwo Jima.
Up the precipitous side of a 600-foot extinct volcano, so precipitous that it seemed almost vertical, went a platoon of American Marines. Even through a glass, they seemed tiny figures scrambling skyward against a background of blue. And then a few minutes later, from the thousands of throats upon ships and on land and sea, came the sudden cry, "There goes the flag." That was how the stars and stripes went up on the first island of Japan's outer rim of island defenses. It was at 11 o'clock, Friday, February 23rd, 9 o'clock Thursday night, New York. We saw that flag going up halfway on the journey to shore with Lieutenant General Holland Smith of the United States Marines. It was the high point in a week of hard fighting, fighting which continues and will continue for some days to come.
On May 8th, in the French city of Rheims, the surrender ceremony in Europe took place. Here is an eyewitness to the signing of the end of hostilities.
Supreme Headquarters. Yes, I saw it. In the small hours of this morning, May the 7th, 1945, I saw the formal acknowledgement by Germany's present leaders, military leaders of their country's complete and utter defeat by land, in the air, and at sea. At exactly 2:39 a.m., the Germans entered the room amid a complete silence that was very soon broken by the activities of the photographers. General Jodl came first, an elderly, slightly bald man of medium height with a thin red-tipped nose and protruding ears, but with some dignity of bearing. He was wearing a field gray tunic with gold epaulets, riding breeches of the same color, with a vivid red stripe down the side, and riding boots. Admiral Friedebold followed in sober navy blue, and then Oxenius, the aide-de-camp, brought up the rear. We advanced to the table where they were met standing by the Allied delegates, whose Chief General Beadle Smith then invited them to be seated, with a gesture that showed neither warmth nor incorrection. In fact, the American's face remained like a mask throughout. And then came the signatures, both the two principal delegates on either side using fountain pens provided by General Eisenhower. They were streamlined gold-capped affairs in the modern American style. And the German party then left the room. They were immediately taken to another room where General Eisenhower himself and his deputy, Air Chief Marshal Tedder, were awaiting them. The interview was brief. No salutes, only a formal bow from either side. "Have you understood the terms?" said Eisenhower. "Yes," said Jodl. "Will you carry them out?" Again the answer was yes. And that was that. The Germans were in the room for exactly 2 minutes.
President Harry Truman made a victory announcement.
I only wish that Franklin D. Roosevelt had lived to witness this day. The
flags of freedom fly all over Europe.
The war in the Pacific is still on. The Marines who landed on Okinawa on April 1st were now securing the island. The report did not come from an American source.
Radio Tokyo admits the battle for Okinawa is virtually over and warns the Japanese people that invasion of the home islands is imminent.
Spring and summer came and went. The fighting in Okinawa went on. The bombing of Tokyo and Nagoya were almost a daily occurrence. By the end of July 1945, nearly 100 Japanese cities had tasted the might of the United States bombing forces. Only 4 major Japanese cities remained undamaged. Their names, Kyoto, Sapporo, Hiroshima, and Nagasaki. It is August 6th, 1945. On Tinian in the Marianas, a B-29 bomber makes ready to take off. It is called the Enola Gay. Piloting the Enola Gay is Colonel Paul Tibbets. He is a man of many firsts. He piloted the first bomber to cross the English Channel and bomb occupied France. He led the first formation to bomb North Africa. He would now have another first. He would be the first man to pilot a plane that would revolutionize modern warfare. In his plane was the first atom bomb. Destination, Hiroshima.
Delaying the start of our scheduled program to bring you the latest direct report on the atomic bomb attack on Japan. CBS World News takes you now to Guam. Webley Edwards reporting.
The men who have applied the greatest weapon ever developed, the atomic bomb, are close-mouthed, serious, and highly impressed with the world-shaking magnitude of what they've done. We talked with Colonel Paul W. Tibbets, Jr. of Miami, Florida, pilot of the B-29 that dropped the first atomic bomb in history. You asked him how he felt about it, and he said he didn't feel anything much, but you knew from talking to him that he sensed the meaning of that bomb's away. The explosion was a big ball of fire. Anyone not having dark glasses would have received a visual shock several miles away. One of the crew members said, "My God," when he saw what had happened. What had been Hiroshima was a white mountain of smoke, and when we saw it first, it was already up to 25,000 feet. About 1,000 feet off the ground, it looked like boiling dust. It extended over most of the city, churning down there. And the center of the impact was in the center of the city. And the boiling continued several minutes as we watched. Then the mushroom of smoke broke off, and another developed below it. This one bomb is the equivalent of a 2,000 B-29 raid. This is Webley Edwards at Guam. I return you to New York.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
The world will note that the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, a military base. We won the race of discovery against the Germans. We have used it in order to shorten the agony of war, in order to save the lives of thousands and thousands of young Americans. We shall continue to use it until we completely destroy Japan's power to make war.
2 days later, the Soviet Union entered the war against Japan.
British Prime Minister Attlee, a few minutes ago, issued a statement welcoming Russia's entry into the war. He said, "We in Great Britain have fully appreciated and understood the tremendous sacrifice and strain imposed on Russia by her heroic campaign against Nazi Germany, And we've always had confidence that as soon as victory had been won in the West, Russia would take her stand with her allies against the enemy on the Eastern Front. The unconditional surrender of Germany has now made possible the deployment of forces of the USSR against the last of the aggressors. The declaration of war made today by Russia against Japan is a proof of a solidarity that exists between the principal allies and should shorten the struggle and establish conditions which will allow general peace to come about. We welcome this great decision of Soviet Russia. Now, that was what was said today by Prime Minister Attlee. And now, for further British reaction to that momentous news, we take you now to London. Edward R. Murrow reporting. This is London. As you just heard, Mr. Attlee has welcomed Russia's entry into the war. But shortly after the Moscow radio had announced war against Japan, a friend of mine called the British Foreign Office, and the reply he got was, "Molotov hasn't told us about it, but we have no reason to doubt that it's happened." The announcement has caused very little excitement here in London. Russia becomes the first nation to enter the Pacific War without being attacked. It is presumed here that she has done so for reasons which have traditionally caused nations to declare war: the defense or furtherance of her national interests. But the best opinion here seems to be that Russia would not have entered the war at this stage had she not had reason to believe that the war in the East was nearing its end. There is no disposition here to discount the weight of Russian military strength and a growing appreciation of what is called the realism of Russian policy. An acknowledgement that Russia has immediate and long-range interests in China. This declaration of war will be regarded as a move to protect, ensure, and perhaps expand them. For the past few weeks, the Russians have had the diplomatic initiative in dealing with China. I do not mean to imply that the Russian declaration has been greeted with cynicism or anything approaching reluctance or exaggerated suspicion. But there has been no evidence of great popular relief or enthusiasm. That may be because most people are still numb with apprehension, trying to absorb the full implications of the atomic bomb. The succession of events, diplomatic, scientific, and military, have simply left people groggy. In the pubs, there were a few toasts drunk to good old Uncle Joe, and people sort of vaguely realized that already this week, humans had demonstrated that they have the power to destroy humanity, and the whole pattern of power in Asia is changing.
The next day, the Japanese city of Nagasaki received an atom bomb attack. An ironic note, the bomb used in the attack against Nagasaki had been so improved. The bomb used against Hiroshima just 3 days before was already obsolete. After Hiroshima, the Japanese High Command had ignored an ultimatum to surrender. Now every day that went by could mean the obliteration of another Japanese city and hundreds and thousands of deaths and permanent injury. August 10th, August 11th. No further atomic attacks. No word of Japanese surrender. It is August 12th, 1945. And now more rumors, finally exultation and disappointment.
Trout in Columbia's newsroom in New York. We have a flash on the United Press wire. President Truman has just announced that Japan has accepted the surrender terms of the Allies. Well, we'll give you some of those details a little bit later, but I want you to hear these bells. Another flash is coming in on the normal United Press wire now. Listen. That is a flash, and this is exactly what it says. This is the regular United Press machine. It says flash. Editors, hold up that flash. And the time on this one at the end is printed 9:36. 9:36. In other words, 3 minutes after the original flash on the United Press radio wire comes a flash on the regular United Press service, which says flash. Editors, hold up that flash. The time 3 minutes later, 9:36 p.m. Eastern War Time. Listen how quiet it is in our newsroom. I wonder if you can appreciate the contrast. Not a machine is working. They're all ominously quiet. They're waiting for further details.
The flash was premature. August 13th, still no atomic attack. Still no official surrender. It is August 14th.
NBC has interrupted this program to bring you a special bulletin from the Associated Press. Washington. Secretary of the Navy Forrestal left a conference with President Truman this morning to say that he hopes the surrender of Japan is an actuality and that he fully expects a development in that respect within 25 or 30 minutes. I shall repeat that. Secretary of the Navy Forrestal left a conference with President Truman this morning to say that he hopes the surrender of Japan is an actuality and that he fully expects a development in that respect within 25 or 30 minutes.
Throughout the day, reports came from all over the world. It is now 7 p.m., August 14th, 1945.
Columbia's news headquarters in New York, Bob Trout speaking. This is the supreme hour, 7 o'clock Eastern wartime. The correspondents at the White House have entered President Truman's office. The Prime Minister of Great Britain is about to begin his broadcast. The Japanese have accepted our terms fully. That is the word we have just received from the White House in Washington, and I didn't expect to hear a celebration here in our newsroom in New York, but you can hear one going on behind me. The Japanese have accepted fully the surrender terms of the United Nations. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of the Second World War. It is not, of course, the official V-jDay, but the United Nations on land, on sea, on air, to the four corners of the earth and the seven seas are united and are victorious. Flash on the INS, or is it UP? MacArthur appointed Jap boss. Flash, MacArthur appointed Jap boss.
It is Sunday, September 2nd, 1945. 3 years, 8 months, 25 days since the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. The place, Tokyo Bay, aboard the battleship Missouri. The situation, the signing of the surrender documents by the Japanese. From the foremast of the Missouri flew the same flag that flew atop the Capitol in Washington on December 7th, 1941. 9 members of the Japanese delegation were on board the Missouri. 3 in formal clothes with top hats. 6 in military uniforms. General Douglas MacArthur, Supreme Commander, Allied Forces Pacific Theater, opened the ceremonies.
We are gathered here, representatives of the major warring powers, to conclude a solemn agreement whereby peace may be restored. As Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers, I announce it my firm purpose, in the tradition of the countries I represent, to proceed in the discharge of my responsibilities with justice and tolerance, while taking all necessary dispositions to ensure that the terms of surrender are fully, promptly, and faithfully complied with. I now invite the representatives of the Emperor of Japan and the Japanese government and the Japanese Imperial General Headquarters to sign the instrument of surrender at the places indicated.
Now a dramatic moment. 2 gaunt heroes of early Allied defeats. Lieutenant General Jonathan Wainwright, defender of Bataan and Corregidor, and Lieutenant General Arthur Percival, the British commander of Singapore.
The Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers will now sign on behalf of all the nations at war with Japan. Will General Wainwright and General Percival step forward and accompany me while I sign? Let us pray that peace be now restored to the world, and that God will preserve it always.
Is over. If there is an epitaph for those who died and a prologue for those not yet born, it was spoken on July 16, 1945, when the first atom bomb was exploded on a New Mexico desert. Describing the scene, one observer said, "The blast was followed almost immediately by the strong, sustained, almost awesome roar, which warned of doomsday and made us feel that perhaps we puny things were blasphemous to dare tamper with the forces heretofore reserved to the Almighty God."
These proceedings are closed.
Westinghouse Broadcasting Company has brought you V-jDay, the end of the war. The voices and sounds of the most dramatic and tragic period of our time. This program was written, produced, and directed by Bud Greenspan. My name is David Perry.